The Bible is nothing more than an astrotheological literary hybrid, just like nearly all religious myths before it. In fact, the aspect of transference of one character's attributes to a new character can be found within the book itself. In the Old Testament, there is the story of Joseph. Joseph was a prototype for Jesus. Joseph was born of a miracle birth. Jesus was born of a miracle birth. Joseph was of 12 brothers. Jesus had 12 disciples. Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Brother Judah suggests the sale of Joseph. Disciple Judas suggests the sale of Jesus. Joseph began his work at the age of 30. Jesus began his work at the age of 30. The parallels go on and on. In fact, the aspect of transference of one character's attributes to a new character can be found within the book itself. In the Old Testament, there is the story of Joseph. Joseph was a prototype for Jesus. Joseph was born of a miracle birth. Jesus was born of a miracle birth.
Okay, parallel number 1. Jesus and Joseph both had a miracle birth. Well, let's just check that out, shall we? What I'm doing here, I'm looking up Genesis at blueletterbible.com. I'm searching for Joseph. And there we are. There's Joseph right there. Let's look what it says. Not hard to find, really. Check these things. Internet. Ooh, wait a minute. Maybe they're right. Could that be it? A miracle birth. Well, let's just look a little bit further, shall we? Let's just try and understand the way Genesis works. We're just back one chapter now. We're still on the story about the birth of Joseph and his brothers, the 2 wives that his father had, all those issues. There we go. What's that? Oh dear, Joseph's older brother also had this miracle birth. Or maybe that's not the way Genesis works. Maybe we should recognize that one of those quirks of Genesis is to describe natural births, that is, conceptions that come about through sexual intercourse, describing them as, a gift from God. Is that a miracle? Well, every child is a gift from God, but come on, you're stretching the meaning of the term miracle a little bit here, don't you think?
Joseph was of 12 brothers. Jesus had 12 disciples. Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver.
Let's just put aside for the moment the fact that 20 pieces of silver does not equal 30 pieces of silver, and ask this question. If the character of Jesus is a literary creation based on the character of Joseph, then why is the idea that Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver not found in the earliest layers of the tradition? The earliest we have is the Gospel of Mark, written around AD 70. Does it say that Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver? No, it doesn't. That detail was only added in a later edit, when you come to the Gospel of Matthew. Why did Matthew add the story, or add the detail to the story, that Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver? Perhaps he got it from the story of Joseph. Perhaps he was reading the story of Joseph again and said, "Oops, we forgot to put that detail in." But if that's the case, why was Jesus sold for 30 while Joseph was sold for 20? Maybe there's another explanation. Maybe the explanation is the plain one that you will find if you check the primary sources. Matthew himself does add parts to the tradition to make it look like Jesus fulfilled prophecy. And, in this case, it's exactly the same. In fact, he tells us where he got it from. He tells us that he got the 30 pieces of silver from the prophets in the Hebrew Bible. And when we look back to the Hebrew Bible, what do we find? 30 pieces of silver, just as Matthew said.
Brother Judah suggests the sale of Joseph. Disciple Judas suggests the sale of Jesus.
As you can see, in the earliest tradition, Judas sold Jesus. He did not suggest the sale of Jesus. Also, Judas was actually a pretty common name. Jesus himself had 2 disciples called Judas and also a brother.
Joseph began his work at the age of 30. Jesus began his work at the age of 30.
Well, would you look at that? Maybe they got one right. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, and Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age. Of course, Joseph wasn't 30 years old when he entered the service of Potiphar, or any of the other major starting points in his life. Well, one of them matches up with the story of Jesus. The story of Jesus as recorded by Luke, one source among many, and not the earliest one at that. Well, but there you go, they found a parallel. Good on them.
The parallels go on and on. The parallels go on and on. The parallels go on and on.
We don't want to be unkind, but we want to be factual. We want to be unkind, but we want to be factual. We want to be unkind, but we want to be factual. We don't want to cause hurt feelings, but we want to be academically correct in what we understand and know to be true.